A bill filed here in Texas this week would create a new form of fraud, gender identity fraud. Filed by Republican State Representative Tom Oliverson, it would be considered a crime if people identified their sex differently than what was assigned at birth to a government entity or an employer. Gwen Howerton with Cron has been following this bill since its filing, and she joins us this afternoon to give us some more insight. Gwen, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, Will, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Let's talk about what kind of punishment this bill proposes and how likely does it look for it maybe to pass?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the text of the bill here, and it says an offense under this section is a state jail felony that usually, as outlined in the penal code, will go from 180 days to up to 2 years in prison and at least a $10,000 fine, which is really alarming when we look at not just, in the scope of what this bill is saying, but when we talk about the treatment of transgender individuals in prisons. We're seeing it play out right now in federal court, moving transgender women into men's prisons. So that in itself is pretty alarming. But as in terms of actual passage, right now, at least, this bill has no sponsors. It's not scheduled for any committee hearings. And so as far as actual passage, I would say that the likelihood of it is really low. But when we look at, this bill probably won't become law. It's super vague. Maybe it wouldn't stand up in court if it did. But it does kind of, when we look at the other bills filed this session that also won't pass, one of them that would ban adult gender affirming care, it kind of moves the Overton window one way of what is possible. And so that's kind of what advocates that I've talked to are really alarmed about.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about that in just a moment. And we'll, of course, keep following these bills or any new developments that might come. But this particular state representative who filed this legislation has filed other bills this session. What else is he trying to accomplish this session based on what you've seen?
Yeah, so it's kind of a grab bag, right? You have this. He also filed a bill, or I think it was a resolution earlier this year that recognized Shenyang Day at the state capitol. But then also there was a bill filed that would actually make mifepristone, the abortion bill or the abortion pill that we're seeing, kind of be this flashpoint in abortion court cases. It would make that a Schedule 4 substance under the Controlled Substances Act in Texas. And so we're kind of seeing that, Tom Oliverson, he was a primary House sponsor of the gender affirming care bill for minors back last session that passed. So this is, somebody who files a lot of, kind of far right leaning legislation. And but it's also a grab bag. But the mifepristone has also been the mifepristone scheduling has been a big objective for him as well.
You also talked to some of the LGBTQ plus advocates here in the state and those who work with the transgender community in Texas. And this bill is only one of several aimed at restricting that particular community in the state. What are some of the other proposals that you're watching and that some of the advocate groups are also watching at the Capitol?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the biggest right now is, I can't remember the bill number off the top of my head, but it would be a bathroom bill in the style of SB 7, which failed a few years ago. That actually just got a majority of the House majority to sign onto it. It was sponsored by Valerie Swanson. It would basically, like we've seen in other places, most notably Ohio recently, it would require public spaces and buildings in the state of Texas. All of the restrooms in those buildings would be required to be used by people only of the biological sex, and that would actually carry pretty stiff penalties too. I believe the fine is $5,000. And that's kind of what I'm watching the most, that people are watching. There's also a few banning DEI in public schools, and those would restrict how teachers can interact with transgender students, meaning that one that just got a hearing in the State Affairs Committee would prohibit school districts from retaliating against teachers who refuse to use a trans student's new name or pronouns. Another one would require like parental identification or parental notification if a student wants to use a new name and pronouns. That advocates worry would out trans students to abusive parents. So those are the kinds of things that are on the table right now. And if I could just take a second, I think what really needs to be stressed to tie it back to something like HB 3817 a few years ago, House Republicans killed a bathroom bill like the one that's being proposed now. And the Overton window has moved so much on trans rights and legislation impacting trans people that, we're seeing this stuff that a couple years ago was dead on arrival is now coming back and actually, yeah, advocates are saying are more dangerous now. So it's kind of all tied together in that way.
Yes, for sure. So thank you so much for that context and for also providing the update about what's being considered right now at the Texas Capitol. Gwen Howerton with the Cron, thanks so much again for being with us.
Thanks, Will. Really appreciate it.